Welcome to Stable and Farm Legal Podcast Series, your trusted source for discussions on agriculture and equine-related topics, with a special focus on Oklahoma and beyond. Whether you're a farmer, rancher, equestrian, or simply curious about the intersection of law and farming and ranching, you have come to the right place. Before we get started, though, we'd like to remind you this podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. For specific legal concerns, please consult a licensed attorney in your area. Stable and Farm Legal is based in Oklahoma and proud to bring you this podcast with the assistance of advanced AI technology. Please note our hosts are created using AI, and any resemblance to a real person's voice is purely coincidental. Now let's dive into today's podcast and explore the legal and practical sides of life in ag and all things equine. See you on the other side.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into HPAI, Highly Pathogenic Avian Influenza. We've got a whole stack of articles and resources here you gave us from the Oklahoma Department of Ag, Food and Forestry, Oklahoma State University Extension, and even some USDA stuff for hunters. We really want to get a grasp on HPAI, huh?
Seems like it, and not a bad idea, honestly. It's been all over the news lately, so let's break it down.
Yeah, so we've got all this material about how it spreads and what it means for Oklahoma specifically. Especially for poultry and dairy cows, which is a little freaky.
Yeah, that is kind of strange, right? But we'll definitely cover all that. By the time we're done with this deep dive, you'll know exactly what's going on.
Okay, so let's start with HPAI itself.
It's basically a type of influenza, a virus, like the flu.
Oh, like the seasonal flu.
Yeah, but this one's way more contagious, and it's usually fatal for birds, especially chickens.
Oh, so it's kind of like a super flu, but just for birds?
Pretty much. And just like the regular flu, it spreads through contact with infected birds or their droppings, but it can also spread indirectly, which is what makes it so tricky.
Indirectly? Like how?
Through contaminated surfaces. Think equipment, vehicles, clothes.
Wow, so it can really travel, huh?
Yeah, it can hitch a ride on just about anything, and that's one reason why it's been so hard to control.
Speaking of hard to control, one thing that really surprised me in this material was that it can affect dairy cows. Like, I would never think bird flu would be a problem for cows.
It's definitely not something you'd expect.
If it can affect cows, should people be worried about drinking milk?
That's a good question. But the good news is pasteurization kills the virus. So commercially available milk and dairy products are totally safe.
Phew. Okay, that's a relief.
Yeah.
But what about humans in general? What's the risk to us?
Right now, the risk to humans is considered pretty low. We haven't seen widespread transmission to people.
So we don't really need to be worried.
Well, it's always good to be cautious, especially if you work closely with birds, like poultry farmers or even people with backyard chickens.
Okay, so basically just common sense precautions.
Exactly. Things like wearing gloves when handling birds, washing your hands thoroughly, and disinfecting equipment. It's always a good idea, whether there's an outbreak or not.
All right, so we've talked about what HPAI is, how it spreads. Let's talk about Oklahoma specifically. What's the situation been like here? I know the ODAAFF website has a whole timeline of HPAI outbreaks.
It does, yeah. And it's been pretty active, I guess you could say.
Active, huh? So like when did Oklahoma first see HPAI?
The first confirmed case was back in March 2022.
2022, wow. Okay, and where was that? What kind of bird?
It was a wild duck.
A duck, huh? So it's been in the wild bird population for a while then.
Seems like it. And then shortly after that, we started seeing cases in both commercial poultry flocks and backyard flocks throughout the rest of the year.
Okay, so from wild birds to domestic birds. Makes sense, I guess. What about more recently?
Well, things quieted down for a little while, but then in October 2023, HPAI made a comeback. We saw new cases popping up in backyard flocks in multiple counties.
So even when it seems like things are calm, it can come back.
Oh, absolutely. And it did again in July 2024, which is when it got a little more concerning, I guess. HPAI was actually confirmed in a dairy herd here in Oklahoma.
In a dairy herd.
Yep. And get this, the positive sample was actually from April of that year.
Wow. So not that long ago. So pretty recently then, November, December last year.
We had more confirmed cases in Adair County in both backyard and commercial flocks.
Wow. Sounds like it's been kind of a roller coaster.
A bit, yeah. HPAI is not going away anytime soon.
So it's something we really need to be prepared for.
Yeah, definitely. Which brings us to a really important point: prevention. What can poultry and dairy farmers do to protect their animals?
So how can farmers protect themselves? What can
Biosecurity. That's the magic word. It's all about preventing HPAI from even getting into your operation in the first place.
Okay, biosecurity. What does that even look like, though? Practically speaking, I mean.
Well, one big thing is limiting contact with the outside world, restricting visitors and making sure anyone who does come in follows strict hygiene rules.
So kind of like all the hand washing and social distancing we did with COVID.
Exactly. You want as much separation as possible between your animals and any potential source of the virus. And that means managing wildlife, too. Wild birds can carry HPAI without even showing symptoms.
Oh, right. So how do you keep them away from your poultry or livestock?
Netting poultry enclosures is good, and making sure feed storage is secure. You also want to get rid of any standing water that might attract waterfowl.
Makes sense. What about disinfecting? Is that part of biosecurity?
Oh, huge part. Disinfecting equipment, vehicles, even footwear before they come onto your farm and before they leave. Tractors, feed trucks, your boots.
Wow, I wouldn't have thought of that.
It's important. HPAI can actually survive on surfaces for a long time, so you got to minimize the risk of it hitching a ride.
So it's really all about being super careful and staying ahead of
So
it.
that much, yeah. It's a constant thing. OSU Extension has some great resources on biosecurity, by the way. We'll link those in the show notes for you.
Yeah, those would be great. Now, what happens if someone thinks their birds or cows might have HPAI already? What do they do then?
Report it immediately. Call the state veterinarian's office. Their number is 405-522-6141. The sooner it's caught, the better.
So reporting super important.
Mhm.
Let's talk about the legal stuff now. Does Oklahoma have rules about HPAI?
Definitely. There are reporting requirements for suspected or confirmed HPAI cases. And those aren't just suggestions, they're the law. There are consequences if you don't follow them.
What kind of consequences?
Well, during that 2022 outbreak, remember, Oklahoma had a statewide ban on poultry exhibitions, public sales, swap meets, that kind of thing. Breaking those rules could mean penalties.
So yeah, there's a reason for those rules.
Yeah.
Okay, what about insurance? Can farmers get coverage for, losses they might have because of HPAI?
It's a good question. I'd recommend talking to your insurance provider about what's available. Policies are all different, so you got to understand what's covered and what's not when it comes to HPAI.
All right, so big picture. What's the main thing you want listeners to take away from all this?
HPAI is serious, but it's not hopeless. If you stay informed, take those biosecurity measures seriously, report any suspected cases right away, you can actually make a difference. It's about protecting Oklahoma's poultry and dairy industries.
Being proactive, basically.
Exactly. The more you know, the better prepared you are. If you work with poultry or dairy cattle at all, this stuff is really important.
Definitely a lot to think about. And one more thing before we go, is it a big question you want to leave listeners with? Something to ponder?
We talked about how HPAI can spread to mammals, right? Even cows. I think that raises some interesting questions about the future. What does this mean for animal health? Human health? It's complicated. No easy answers, but it's definitely something to consider as we learn more about this virus.
Lots to think about, for sure. At first glance might seem a little niche, but trust me on this one, it really does connect to some big picture stuff when we talk about global health.
Yeah.
We're talking about avian influenza,
You bet.
specifically that H5N1 subtype. And what's got us really interested is this unexpected appearance
Right.
in a place you wouldn't really think of it, in Mongolian horses.
Yeah, it is kind of fascinating, isn't it? We always think about avian influenza as like a bird problem.
Right.
But this research letter that we're going to take a deep dive into today, it really challenges that assumption.
It does. It really does. And we have a few sources that we're going to be using to guide us.
Yeah,
First up, of course, is the research letter itself.
of course.
It's called Evidence of Influenza A, H5N1, Spillover Infections in Horses.
Hmm.
And we're also going to be looking at some information from the CDC about, avian influenza in general, and some materials from the USDA and FDA that kind of outline their response plans and regulations and what they're doing to make sure our food is safe.
Right.
So by the end of this deep dive, you'll understand why these findings in these Mongolian horses are actually pretty significant, and how it all kind of connects to the bigger picture of H5N1.
Yeah, I like to think of it like a puzzle, and we're going to put these pieces together and kind of see what the full picture might look like.
Exactly. So before we get too far into the weeds on this horse study,
Okay.
let's just kind of set the scene with some basics about H5N1.
Right.
The CDC tells us that, avian influenza, or bird flu as it's commonly known, is this type of influenza virus that primarily affects birds.
Okay.
But there are certain subtypes out there, like H5N1 and H7N9, that are known to infect humans.
Right.
And they can cause some pretty serious respiratory illness.
Yeah, and to bring this even closer to home, just this past July, we had 3 poultry workers in Colorado test positive for H5N1 after they were culling some infected birds.
Oh, wow.
So this is a real reminder that this virus is circulating and has the potential to, make that jump to humans.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that it's, we talk about it globally, but it is right here in our backyard, essentially.
It is.
And, those workers only experience mild symptoms, so it's not a huge deal, but it's still kind of unsettling to think about it.
Yeah.
This kind of brings us to, this concept of zoonotic diseases.
Yeah.
Which are diseases that can be transmitted from animals to humans.
Right. Yeah. These kind of jumps are a major concern for global health.
Yeah.
And this Mongolian horse study kind of sheds some light on how these spillover events can happen and why it's so important that we really understand them.
Okay, so let's talk about these horses.
Sure.
The study was done in Mongolia, a country known for its vast grasslands and, of course, its horses.
Absolutely.
What the researchers found was, it was kind of surprising. Horses are actually susceptible to H5N1 infection.
And these spillover events, that transmission from birds to horses, may be happening more often than we initially thought.
Yeah, and here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
So horses could potentially act as what scientists would call a mixing vessel for these different influenza viruses.
Okay.
So let's say, for example, a horse gets infected with both H5N1 and the more common equine influenza virus, that H3N8. Inside the horse's cells, these two viruses could actually swap genetic material.
So you're saying they could create a totally brand new influenza strain?
Yeah, it's
It's scary.
It's definitely something to keep an eye on. Just imagine a flu virus that has the contagiousness of equine flu.
Oh, wow.
But combined with the severity of H5N1.
That would be bad.
Yeah. So, and the study also found that these infections in horses are often what we call subclinical, meaning they don't show obvious symptoms.
So they could be spreading it without anybody even knowing. Yeah. Oh, that makes it harder to track and control.
Exactly. And that's why the researchers are recommending we start doing these regular serological surveys in horse populations.
Yep.
And basically what these surveys would do is check for the presence of H5N1 antibodies in horses, even if they're not showing any visible signs of illness.
So it's like a proactive way to detect it.
Exactly.
And maybe stop it from spreading further.
Precisely. Early detection is key when it comes to, controlling infectious diseases,
right? Especially
ones that have this potential to jump between species like this.
Wow. Well, this study has certainly given me a lot to think about into this.
Yeah, so biosecurity is really key when it comes to preventing and controlling the spread of diseases like H5N1.
Okay.
And it involves kind of 2 main components. We've got biocontainment and bioexclusion.
So biocontainment would be about containing the virus if there is an outbreak?
Exactly. So think of it like you're creating this protective bubble around an infected area.
Okay.
So that might involve things like isolating infected flocks, disinfecting equipment, facilities, and then restricting the movement of people and animals kind of in and out of that affected area.
Okay, and bioexclusion would be preventing the virus from coming onto a farm or into a facility in the first place.
Exactly. So it's all about building up that strong line of defense.
Yeah.
And that might include things like, having designated footwear for different areas of a farm, controlling access to the poultry houses, and then, sourcing those birds from reputable suppliers that have strong biosecurity measures already in place.
Right. So it's like physical barriers combined with, good hygiene practices.
Exactly.
Does that apply to horse owners as well?
Absolutely. So horse owners need to be, they need to be aware of the risks and take steps to protect their animals.
Right.
So they should be, trying to minimize that contact between between their horses and wild birds because those are the primary carriers of H5N1.
Okay.
So that might involve things like keeping the feed and water sources covered, securing those stables, and even avoiding areas where wild birds might, congregate.
So it really sounds like biosecurity is everyone's responsibility, not
Yeah.
just, the government or big farms.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
We all have a role to play when it comes to preventing the spread of these infectious diseases.
Right.
And that's especially true, when we're dealing with a virus like H5N1 that has this potential to jump between species and cause, really serious illness.
It's like almost a domino effect.
Yeah.
What happens in one part of the world or with one species can really have these ripple effects across the globe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why that international collaboration and communication is so important in this fight against H5N1.
Yeah.
We need to be sharing information, coordinating our effort.
And really working together to develop these effective control strategies.
Yeah.
It sounds like we've learned a lot about H5N1 over the years, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right.
This virus is constantly evolving, so we need to stay vigilant and really continue to invest in research and surveillance.
Yeah, and as we saw with this Mongolian horse study, we might find some surprises in the most unexpected places.
Absolutely.
What really kind of stood out to you from study?
What I found really fascinating is just how much we still don't know.
Yeah.
We're really just starting to kind of scratch the surface when it comes to understanding the role that horses might play in the spread of H5N1.
Right.
We really need more research to determine how often these spillover events are happening, how easily the virus is transmitted between horses,
Right.
and what the implications are for human health.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot more to this story that we haven't uncovered yet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore some of those unanswered questions.
Okay. And what they might mean for the future of H5N1 and its impact on the world.
All right, so we're back for the final part of our H5N1 deep dive. And I gotta say, this has really been eye-opening.
It has been a fascinating journey, hasn't it? We started with just the basics of what is avian influenza?
Right.
And now we're talking about, H5N1 and Mongolian horses. Yeah.
Yeah, and, we've kind of explored this whole complex web of interconnected factors that contribute to the spread and the potential consequences, not just for animal health, but for human health and the economy
Absolutely.
globally. And we also talked about how important biosecurity is.
Yes.
Both on a large scale, but also for individual horse owners.
Yeah.
Just a reminder that we all really have a role to play in preventing the spread of these infectious diseases.
For sure.
And those serological surveys in horse population, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That it's proactive disease monitoring.
It is. If we can catch those spillover events early, we have a much better chance of containing them.
Absolutely. It's like we're,
It's like a detective story.
Yeah, it's like we're detectives, right?
Yeah.
Trying to find the clues.
Except the clues are hidden in horse blood.
Yeah, exactly.
It also kind of emphasizes how important the work is.
Right.
That's being done by these organizations like the USDA and the CDC.
Absolutely.
They're, constantly monitoring the situation, developing new strategies,
right.
working to protect us.
Yeah.
I have to admit, when we first started this deep dive, I was feeling a little overwhelmed just by the sheer volume of information
right.
that's out there about H5N1.
Yeah, it is a complex topic,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of research being done.
But that also means that
But
people are taking it seriously.
it shows how seriously
Yeah.
this virus is being taken.
And it also makes you realize, it's so important to make sure you're getting information from reliable sources.
Absolutely.
Those websites, the CDC, the USDA, the FDA.
Yeah.
Those are great resources to stay up to date.
They are. And
it's all about empowering yourself with knowledge.
absolutely.
The more we understand about it,
Right.
the better equipped we'll be to, protect ourselves, our animals, and the planet.
Well said. Well said. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to infectious diseases.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
It has.
And I really hope that everyone listening has learned something new today.
I hope so, too.
I know I certainly have.
Me too. Me too. We've covered a lot of ground, but like we always say, there's always more to learn, right?
Right.
So we encourage you to keep exploring this topic,
Yeah.
ask questions,
Yeah.
and share what you've learned with others. Because as we've seen with H5N1, this is a global challenge
Yeah.
that requires, a collective effort.
It does. It does. Well, thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Until next time.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode from Stable and Farm Legal Podcast Series. We hope you found this discussion insightful and engaging. As a reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. If you have specific legal questions, we encourage you to consult with a qualified attorney. This podcast is proudly produced by Stable and Farm Legal in Norman, Oklahoma, with the assistance of advanced AI technology. And remember, the hosts are created using AI, and any resemblance to real persons' voices is purely coincidental. Be sure to subscribe and tune in for our next episode, where we will continue to explore the unique intersection of law, agriculture, and equine management. Until then, take care, and we hope you join us next time.